he was playing sort of a definitional game, like a labeling game. Have like, meanings, and you can't just I could label declare. We got a couple of others in here.
Hello.
Hey, Brenda.
Hey, guys. Come on.
I thought that was very poorly. I didn't care for that one guy. The comedian guy. I thought he was just annoying and not funny. He was trying too hard to be funny.
Mm-hmm. He seemed very annoyed. He seemed very. I don't know why he was even in there, to be honest. I think that James should have looked for somebody else. I think he could have probably had. There's a whole host of people out there he could have had come in. But yeah, the guy acted like he was on drugs or something.
Yeah, I think he was. I think James could have spent a lot more time having the guy on mute.
Nah, he wasn't contributing. He wasn't on drugs. He was just acting goofy to try to get attention.
I don't. Well, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. But he carried himself like I don't think I've really seen anybody act as bad as he's acted. Some have come pretty close, but he's very ridiculous.
Ronnie, you made a good point when you were talking about T-Jump, talking about the labeling of crystals. Now, this is classic T-Jump arguing or debating. He will talk for hours about semantics, but not the actual debate topic, and it's extremely exhausting. It's really exhausting.
Do you think the argument is correct, though, Gavin?
What was the debate topic? Because I came in late.
Well, last night, Tom Jump's point about crystals. Do you think that his point was valid?
Well, again, I'll repeat the question. What was the debate topic?
Intelligent design.
Because I came in late.
Huh?
The debate topic was intelligent design.
Yeah.
The debate topic was intelligent design. Right? He was carrying on about the crystals, saying that you can transfer the properties of a turbine to a crystal and just call a turbine, call a crystal a turbine based on certain properties. And so the statement was vague. And on top of that, you don't get to do that with words or language because words and languages have meanings. And so you can't just call, for example, a carrot a car, obviously, because there's certain reasons why we define a car a certain way and a carrot a certain way. So the statement that he made was just nonsensical. There was no value in it. It was incoherent.
So you don't think that Tom Jump's analogy with the crystal was a coherent argument?
No.
Where was the contradiction? What was the contradiction?
He used a statement to say that you can basically call a crystal a turbine, and he was basically trying to say, well, you can define it as anything, and though it doesn't work that way.
That wasn't what he said.
Okay, well, you tell me what it was that he said.
He said that you could have a designed crystal that's only produced by humans. And then if you go to another planet and you find that crystal there, it's not valid to infer that crystal on the alien planet was designed.
Okay, he said that too. But he also said when he shifted the point after that was refuted and he made it into a different argument that you can transfer the properties to what we used to call a turbine onto a crystal and it would be the same thing. So yes, he did say that.
So what was the refutation? You said the first part was refuted. How did that go?
The first part or the explanation I already just gave you?
So Tom Jump's argument was that humans could design a crystal that's only found as a designed object by humans. We find it on another planet, and it is not sound to infer that this crystal we find on another planet is designed. You said that's refuted, and I'm wondering what that refutation is.
Because it only becomes refuted when you show that a naturally occurring force or system can, or anything absent from an intelligent agent can produce that. You see, because if the argument that I presented is that certain patterns in nature, certain patterns are only known to come from an intelligent agent, that's premise one. Premise two, those patterns are observed inside of the cell. Conclusion, therefore, because those patterns are observed in the cell, the best explanation to hold to is that there was an intelligent agent behind them. This particular position can only be refuted if you show an alternative to that of an intelligent agent. So when you're talking about things being produced in other planets or something like that, crystals being produced in other planets, you can say he's basically, you can say that all you want. You can say, well, there's an object that's only come from an intelligence. That's what I'm trying to say. And say, well, that object is located somewhere else.
Well, then that's what he said. That's what he said.
Don't interrupt. You did that last time. Don't start interrupting. So that's good for him to say that. If he's going to say that there's an object located in another place that we know only comes from an intelligent agent, that's fine. That's what I can hold to. That would be an indicator of design. But once you start trying to say, well, it's then therefore not needed, a designer is not needed because it's something that naturally occurs, well, then you're starting to beg the question. And
no,
the reason why you're starting to beg the question,
what he said.
Okay, yes, that is what he was saying.
No, it's not. That's not the argument.
That is the argument. When you start to say that something is naturally occurring, and he slipped that in there in the middle of his point, that therefore it is not needed, and that's what he said, then you're assuming that a naturally occurring system can produce the thing that we are talking about, which was the ATP synthase. And once you slip something like that in there, the burden of proof is on you to show that there is an alternative to demonstrate that, to account for.
Isn't ATP synthase also naturally occurring?
It naturally occurs because it's part of a system in place that self-replicates. If you're claiming that evolutionary theory can produce that, is responsible for that origin, then you have to provide evidence.
Yeah, that's been done multiple times, but
by who?
Lots of people. So,
man, you're not gonna avoid this.
So the point, no, but I want to get back to Tom Jump's argument, which you still haven't understood.
Where is the evidence for this, Brenda?
For what? For ATP synthase? For a valid.
The evolution of the ATP synthase. Where's the evidence for this? Typing. Where's the evidence for this?
Yeah, it's just evolution of ATP synthase. There we go.
Where's the evidence for it? I'll tell you what hexameric helicases. What are they doing with that? I hear you typing. That's what it is. You're going to be finding something like the hexameric helicases.
I don't know. No.
You don't know, but you just told me that there's evidence.
Vasilik Lila Komando and Sofia Kasaida. I put the link here. Nevertheless, the point was that Tom's argument was
hold on a second. We're going to stay on this point, Brenda. We're not going to move further until we stay on this point. So Tom's argument is that it's no longer needed because you're looking at something that is naturally occurring. The claim here is, well, the cell that or the ATP synthase is something that's natural. So therefore, we can just ignore the fact that it is an object on the table that we are trying to question to come to an understanding over. You don't just get to sit over here and say, well, it's natural. So therefore, I get to just hold to that and say, well, it's just natural. And there's no need for a designer because, well, it's just natural. You're begging the question when you make that statement.
I'm not.
Reasoning.
No, that's not circular. No.
If it's not circular, then you have to provide evidence for it.
I did. I put the link in the private chat here. So the point is that there is an evolutionary pathway for ATP synthase.
Explain it for me. Because your position is claim X assumes claim X is true, therefore claim X is true. That's what your position is. That is
No,
what you
no,
begging
that's
question
not
fallacy.
that's not the claim.
That's not the begging question fallacy.
No, I'm not. Well, I'm not making that claim that you said I'm making.
But you just said that it's because it's natural. You just told me. You said that it's natural. It's the cell.
No, I said that we have
It's
an evolutionary pathway for how a complex structure like ATP synthase could have evolved naturally.
okay. So let's read through this together and see if this is actually true. I'm putting it in the link in the search bar right now. Look, this one is saying that it can't be found. Hold on a second. I don't want us to move any further in this discussion. So we've confirmed that the ATP synthase has been shown to evolve.
Well, the point would be to show that there is a pathway by which it could have evolved.
I know why you're saying pathway. Okay, so here's what it says. Evolution of the F0. And I'm going to give you guys what I think this is going to say right here. It's going to be comparing homologies, like I've said in the last discussion with Brenda and the last discussion with these people that I was just speaking to. And it's going to try to compare lineages. We're going to be dealing with pareidolia. They're not going to show any mechanisms of evolution, any creative force through evolution to actually demonstrate that the mechanisms of evolution can produce this thing. I bet any amount of money that that's what we're going to see here. So it says the evolution of the F0, F1 ATP synthase complex in light of the patchy distribution of different bioenergetic pathways across prokaryotes. Abstract. Bacteria and archaea are characterized by an amazing metabolic diversity, which allows them to persist in diverse and often extreme habitats. Apart from oxygenetic photosynthesis and oxidative phosphorylation, well-studied processes from chloroplast and mitochondrioplast in animals, prokaryotes utilize various chemo or lithotropic modes, such as oxygenetic photosynthesis, ion oxidation, reduction, sulfate reduction, and methanogenesis. Most bioenergetic pathways have a similar general structure. So look, we're dealing with similarities now. See that? General structure with an electric transport chain composed of protein complexes acting as electron donors and acceptors, as well as central cytochrome complex mobile electron carriers at the ATP synthase. While each pathway has been studied in considerable detail and isolation, not much is known about their relative evolutionary relationships. Wanting to address how the metabolic diversity evolved, we mapped the distribution of 9 bioenergetic modes and phylogenetic tree bases of the 16 sRNA sequences from 272 species, representing the full diversity of the prokaryotic lineages. So what did they just tell you there? They mapped the tree of the phylogenetic tree of tree base of the 16 sRNA sequences from 272 species. Yeah. So that what they did was they
skip down to our results
indicate. This highlights the patchy distribution of the many pathways across different lineages and suggests either up to 16 independent origins of 17 horizontal gene transfer events. Next, we use comparative genomic and phylogenetic analysis of all the subunits of the F0, F1 ATP synthase, common of most bacterial lineages. What did I just tell you guys? Regardless of their biogenetic modes, our results indicates an ancient origin of this protein
complex, yes, and no clustering based on bioenergetic mode, which suggests no special modifications needed for the ATP
I can't hear myself read when you're reading. Can you stop that, please? And no special modifications are needed for the ATP synthase to work.
There you go, right there. There you go.
Stop. What are you talking about? Electron transport chains. Moreover, examination of the ATP synthase genetic locus indicates various gene rearrangements of the different bacterial lineages, ancient duplications of the ATPI
and the beta ATP and the beta subunits of the F0 subcomplex, as well as more recent Stoffic lineage specific and species specific duplications of the subunits. We discuss the implications of the overall pattern of conversation of flexibility of F0 and F1 ATP synthase genetic locus. So don't interrupt me. I'm going to talk about what I just read here. I just said just now, before I even read this article, that the only thing you're going to find is comparative anatomy, comparing homologies, or tracing lineages, declaring that, but never showing that the mechanisms of evolution can produce these particular systems. They mapped out 272 species. They looked at the different sequences that they were observing within these species, and they are declaring the patterns that they are observing a lineage. So you didn't show me that the evolutionary mechanisms can that nature. Don't interrupt me, because if you do that, I'm going to mute you. You did that last time. I'm going to talk. Okay. The 272 species were traced. Okay. We just read the abstract. I'll read the entire thing later if you want to challenge this. But all we saw here was a tracing of the lineages. So going back to the claim that we made before we start that we're going on by what TJ jumped to what you're talking about here now, something that's naturally occurring doesn't need to have an explanation, right? Doesn't need to needs to have an explanation if you're going to violate the first premise that I offered in my argument, right? Certain patterns are only known to come from an intelligent agent. This point here doesn't deal with any knowledge. This point here that we're looking at with this article is dealing with a tracing of lineages and looking at it from the perspective of pareidolia. They're looking at those lineages and they're suggesting that there is a relationship there because of the similarities that they are observing. This isn't demonstrating that this is actually true, that that nature on its own can lead up to and build this object.
What did they say that their results indicated?
Okay, hey, what's going on?
What did they say that their results indicated? Hello? What did they say that their results indicated?
I hear what you're saying, but are you kidding me? How did they come to the indication? That's the question.
No, but what did they say that their results indicated?
Indicates that they believe that they're sharing a relationship, that there is ancestry, but I don't care. That's the point here. The way that they came to this conclusion was by tracing 272 species and looking at the lineages. They were looking at the pathways. That's not telling me anything. I can take.
Well, what is lineage? What does the word lineage mean?
Do you want me to respond to you? You can take a car, you can take a skateboard, you can take a bicycle, you can line them up next to each other and say, hey, they're all related to each other. They came from a couple of screws, a couple million years ago because of the similarities that you're lining up. But it's pareidolia, it's pattern seeking. Do you understand what I'm saying?
It said, what does the word lineage mean?
Why are you asking me?
What does the word lineage mean?
I'm not justifying that with the response. Where's the evidence that evolution can produce this?
They sequenced 272 species, their lineage. What does the word lineage mean?
So apparently you don't have anything to say here.
I do. Lineage.
No, you don't. You're asking me what lineages mean.
What does it mean?
And the topic has to do with whether or not.
What
no,
the word
doesn't have to do with lineage.
Yes, it does.
So
lineage. True. Let me have this one sentence. Lineage means.
This is what we're going to do here. The fact that you're going to sit over here and question me about what lineages mean, I'm not as slow and on the uptake as you guys are. This discussion that just took off right now is not going to be like it was in the discussion that I had with you last time, where you were constantly shifting the goalposts after you were questioned on certain things, okay? This discussion that we're having now has to do with the claim that was made over on the discussion that I had with TJ. And so in this discussion that I had with TJ, as we're talking about here now, we are talking about whether nature on its own can produce an object that is not needed by an intelligent agent. And so try to follow this. The article that you gave me traced lineages and compared the similar sequences in the
Gavin, you're making a lot of noise.
in the 272 species that were available. And so you need to understand that the article that you gave me wasn't dealing with the topic that we have at hand. So
It
don't change.
directly deals with it. True, it deals directly with it.
Okay, how does it deal with it?
It traced the lineage of 272 species.
How does
Lineage,
tracing the lineage how does tracing the lineage show me that the mechanisms of evolution can produce the system?
because lineage means descent from an ancestor.
Okay, it
That's
means
that's the claim of evolution.
yes, I understand. I descended from my mother and my father. My mother and my father, they descended from their grandparents. But how does that get me by tracing the lineage to a mechanism of evolution producing an effect?
They show that in the entire paper, right? That
Well, there,
ATP synthase descended from has an ancestral lineage.
And do you know how they show that lineage?
No, I haven't read the paper, and it's
By tracing
probably
you didn't read the paper. I just read the abstract to you. They talked about the 17 horizontal gene transfers in those during those events.
so they traced the lineage of 272 species, and they came to a conclusion. Our results indicate an ancient origin for ATP synthase. It's literally what the paper says. Okay, do we finally understand it now?
Hold on, no,
There
give
is
hold
an
on,
evolutionary
give me a couple of seconds. Hold on.
there is an evolutionary mechanism by which ATP could have been produced, and there's no need to invoke a deity to specially design or specially create ATP.
Hold on a second. I was texting somebody. No, we're not getting anywhere with this at all, Brenda. I'm sorry. The article that we read through was tracing lineages, like I told you.
Yes.
Before I read it, I pointed out and I told you. I pointed out and I told you that all we're gonna be dealing with right now is comparing homologies, comparing similar sequences. That's all we're doing here now.
Homologous
The article
structures.
didn't show anything that you were claiming at all.
Homologous structures show a common descent.
No, they don't. They don't
Yeah,
show
they
common.
do.
No, they
Well,
don't.
you're just denying it.
I'm
That's
not denying anything. I'm telling you that they don't show common descent. You can perceive that subjectively, but they don't show common descent. When you say they show common descent, you're saying that they prove common descent or they indicate common descent. They can indicate common descent to somebody who's already got those preconceived notions, the similarities that they find there, or the identical features that they find there is what shows the common ancestry. But there's nothing that I can hold to objectively that shows that that's actually valid.
Do you think that the fact that the child resembles their parent shows that the child
yes
descended from that's homology. That's homologous.
But you know where it starts to become different? Because you want to talk about lineages right here. So, okay, let's change the subject, okay? Because this is going to lead us right back to the problem that you have at hand. Lineage. Me and my mother and my father, we all share common ancestry. We all
we're all related to one another. You can look at that in our DNA. That's interesting, right? One thing that you could also look in your DNA is we're supposedly taking things all the way back to us and the chimpanzees that diverge from one another, is that there's a difference there of 98 to 96% of DNA. That difference is what's actually important there, because you have to demonstrate the mechanisms of evolution can code for those differences to produce the different brain anatomy and different physiology that we have. It's the differences that are important. And
no,
the way that
it's the similarities. Similarities show common descent.
The way that you deal with those differences, is by showing that the mechanisms of evolution can account for those differences. And every time I got hold on a second, guys. I got somebody texting me. I'll be back. Hold on.
Oh, okay. So true is wrong. Homologous structures indicate common descent. The fact that I resemble my parents shows that I descended from my parents.
I might have to take off in about 10 minutes. I got something going on.
Arguments from homology, true, are sound inferences.
No, they're not. No, they're not.
Yes. Well, you just denying that they are isn't an argument.
Brenda, just stop. I just read through the article. It said exactly what I said it was going to say.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with drawing.
You don't get to take a bunch of objects or a bunch of dead creatures or a bunch of living creatures or a bunch of anything, put them up on the table, and look at them and say, these look similar to this one. This one's got the same similarities as this one. This one's not as similar as these three, so we're going to put that further down the line.
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. That's exactly what some evolutionists have done for hundreds of years now.
That's the problem, isn't it?
No, it's not a problem.
You got to actually prove some things. You don't just get to say, I subjectively perceive something, and then never demonstrate what you're claiming. That's the problem here. If you have actual evidence for what you're claiming, then the burden of proof is on you to show it. How do you show it? You use the mechanisms of evolution. In a scientific theory, mechanisms are important. You have to test your mechanisms to show if your conclusion is valid, okay? And so if you can show me that the mechanisms of evolution can show that the ATP synthase can be produced, then you have something. But if all you have to show me is an article that is suggesting that there is a lineage, or that not a lineage, that there is actual common ancestry, rather than tracing these 272 different species, I have nothing to go on. So go ahead, speak.
Well, number one, I'm not over talking you, but homologous structures show common ancestry. This is not you denying that that's valid doesn't make it invalid. It is a sound inference to say that if you see similar structures across families of organisms, that they have a common ancestor. And this is how evolution is demonstrated to be in fact the case, by showing the similarity of different species lead to a familiar and phylogenetic ancestors. That's how it's done.
I'm going to talk now.
You just denying it doesn't make it true.
Okay, I'm going to talk now. You do not get to keep on repeating yourself here, okay? And if you're going to say that it's a scientific theory, let's not forget this, okay? Because when Brenda comes in this room, she jumps back and forth between points and tries to avoid things that are said, and then she distracts things. The points that all this is taking off over is a claim that was made that the crystal example that was given by TJ Jump was valid. And so I accused her of doing what she basically accused in the other room, is that all she's doing is she's begging the question by acting as if you can just use a circular reasoning. It's nature, so it's valid. Nature can account for itself. You don't get to do that. If you're going to say that nature, the system in place in nature, the basic unit of life, that is justifiable. The basic unit of life can be produced through evolutionary mechanisms or abiogenesis, whatever. Nature can create this thing.
then you have to actually show mechanisms of evolution creating this. And so instead of her doing this, she gave us an article that pointed out the lineage of related objects to the ATP synthase and these different related metabolic pathways. And so the one thing we need to pay attention to is that it didn't show how the ATP synthase evolved. Okay, it didn't show how the ATP synthase was created. It didn't show that at all. Okay, all we're looking at here is that it shares relation with other ATP synthases. If we were even to grant her what she was saying, or different metabolic pathways, it shares a relationship with these things. It doesn't tell us that nature has created this or that nature was able to produce this. So then she's jumping the gun to lineages. As lineages shows that that this thing was actually created. No, lineages just shows that we have a lineage. I have a lineage with my mother, my father, my grandparents. So do all of you guys. But a lineage is not a word that is synonymous with creative ability. Does nature have the ability to build these things? Well, the article doesn't show that. It's trying to claim that there's an evolutionary path where there's a relationship there. Well, all that is pareidolia. It's pattern seeking. But again, if we were to grant you what the article is claiming, that okay, there's a relationship there with different metabolic pathways or whatever, well, then that's all the article is showing, that there's a relationship there. The original point had to do with whether or not that nature can actually account for this system, and she hasn't provided evidence for that.
Pareidolia is not pattern seeking.
It's like seeing faces in the clouds and
yeah, that's not pattern seeking. That's a psychological.
It's like seeing
thing.
faces in the clouds and what you want to see.
In
and
random.
If you deny it, I'm just going to go to the definition and then we'll read it out here out loud. Okay.
Oh, okay. I got it right up here. It says pareidolia is a psychological phenomenon that causes people to see patterns in random stimulus. We're not talking
you just
about.
Said it wasn't pattern. You just said it wasn't pattern. You just said it wasn't pattern seeking.
That's right. We're seeing the patterns that we see in the.
You just read it. It's not that we're seeing patterns.
The patterns.
You just read it.
Yes,
you just read it.
Yes, I know. But the fact that you're affirming the consequent, the patterns that we see in the fossil record and in evolutionary history are real. They're not random stimulus.
Pareidolia. I got it up right here. Pareidolia is the tendency of the incorrect perception of the stimulus as an object's pattern or meaning known to the observer, such as seeing shapes in the clouds, seeing faces in inanimate objects, or abstract patterns or hearing hidden messages in music. Pareidolia can be considered a subcategory of apophenia.
Yeah.
So what did I just? You just denied what I said. I said it's like seeing faces in the clouds.
No,
yes,
there's the faces aren't actually in the clouds.
Okay, Brenda.
But the lineage of ATP synthase is actual. It isn't a random stimulus. It's real. It's not random like a cloud.
Sure. Okay, so I guess this is what we're doing now. Okay, you're now shifting the goalpost. You're not going to demonstrate that evolution can actually produce the ATP synthase. You're instead going to defend, well, the ATP synthase is related to other objects. I'm more than willing to challenge you on that. Show me the mechanisms of evolution showing the leading from one of these lineages to the other.
I just did. The paper I cited shows lineage by homologous structures demonstrate common descent.
If I take two books, Linda or Brenda, if I take two books and I put them on the table, one book is using the English alphabet, the other one is, well, you don't know who the author is, and they both are using the English alphabet. You happen to look at how many times one book is using the word the or whatever, and the other one as well. And you say, well, this one has 86% of the same sequences and how the characters are used, and this one's got 90% of the same sequences. Does it logically follow that they have a common author?
Yeah, it does. It would. If you have a manuscript let me show it to you. If you have a manuscript,
if I have To Kill a Mockingbird, and I have any other book, Jay's what's the book? I don't know. A Wrinkle in Time.
They're both books that use the English alphabet. Let's say you took the author's name off of there. They're both using the English alphabet. You don't know who wrote it. So if they come out to having about 86, 90% of the same language, you're going to say that they have the same author?
If I have To Kill a Mockingbird as a manuscript, and then I have another manuscript that is nearly the same with the exception of, say, 5% or 10% misspellings of the words, then I can say that the other document shares a lineage and ancestry with the first one. So yes, that's a valid inference.
You just are making an assertion, and you're going to really hold to that?
It's sound. It's how historians. It's how historians judge ancient manuscripts. If you have two manuscripts that differ only in only in a few points, you can say that that they're related, that they have a relationship.
Do you convince yourself that this stuff is true? Like, do you sit there and talk in the mirror every day and say, you know what, this stuff is true? Like, who would even say something like that? You really believe that
all
if you didn't
historians, this is how historians work.
How about you use my example, okay? Because you're clearly bastardizing history right now. How about you use the example that I gave you right now? To Kill a Mockingbird and A Wrinkle in Time. You never read those books before. You don't know who the author is of those books. They have a similar amount of sequences in how the English alphabet is being used. Can you say logically, if you didn't know who they were, that they shared a common author? Can you say that?
That they have an ancestry relationship, not that they have a common author, but that they share a history, and that history would be that they're English language books.
So they're related,
as opposed to all the other books that I have that are in foreign languages.
So how would they be related to one another? How?
They're related by the fact that they're English.
So who cares if they're English?
But that's how they're related. They're not in Spanish, French, or German, are they?
Okay, well, who cares?
That's the point. That's the
point.
You're
basically saying that because language, that they're related because of language.
Well, that is the relation.
We're talking about the origination of it.
They were both produced by English language speakers.
I don't care about that.
But that is what it shows.
That's not the question. That's not the question.
It is the question. That
is
the question.
If it came from a common ancestor.
Yeah, the ancestry is that they were both produced by English authors.
Okay, that's great. They both came from English authors. Great.
Yes.
That's great. That's good.
Homology is evidence for common ancestry.
Don't interrupt me. If you want to play that game, all we have to say is, well, they're both evidence of a creator. I'm asking you how you get relation from the similarity of the sequences involved. How can you assess the originator from the similarity in sequences involved?
I just showed to you by homology. By homologous structures indicate common ancestry.
Wow. You're ridiculous, man.
But this is how historians judge manuscripts.
You're too stubborn.
So this is how historians will judge two manuscripts. Suppose there are thousands of manuscripts of the early manuscripts of the New Testament, right? And many of them contain variations. There are slight variations here and there. But then what historians do is they combine these all together and say, well, there must have been a common text that all of these authors used. We call it Q. And we're going to say that this document, which nobody has ever discovered, nevertheless must have been the source of all these variants. This is how historians work. This is how it's done, and it's a valid inductive inference to deduce from homologous features to say that there's a likelihood of common descent.
Okay, Brenna, so now I'm going to respond to you. Okay, I'm not going to mute you now. Let me respond, please. Science is not history. History is sort of a soft science, but history is not science. The reason why I brought up to you the example of DNA is because DNA is a language. DNA is the end result of specific sequences. And so, if you're going to claim that we share common ancestry with the what do we even talk about? If we're going to be sharing common ancestry with anything, you can't get or ascertain what evolution can do just by looking at these. Hold on a second. I'm sorry, guys. Give me a second here. I'm going to come back to this point in a second. Keep talking, Brenda.
Oh, okay. So yes, you can show that. And number one, DNA is not a language. It is absolutely not a language. You don't understand information. That was another point that Tom Jump made the other night, which is that you're confusing Shannon information with stochastic information, which you don't understand information theory any more than you understand pi. Right, so he must be away for a while. So the point is, homologous structures can be shown within 272 species, and they showed a direct lineage, and this is a viable pathway for the evolution of ATP synthase. I don't know. I haven't read the article, but I'm sure that there are others that also go into other explanations that show that it's possible for ATP synthase to have evolved from simpler structures, and that's all we need. The simple fact is that complexity is not design, and you can't show design because you have no criteria for distinguishing design from non-design.
Sorry about that. I'm sorry, guys. My phone's going off the hook right now. I got something going on, and
Okay, well that's
I
fine.
probably won't have to leave.
That's fine.
Well,
Maybe sometime True, you can tell me by what criteria you can infer design.
By what criteria? That wasn't the point that we were on. What was the point that we were on?
No, it's a new one that I'm talking about since you were gone. What criteria do you use to determine that something is designed?
What criteria do we use to see what was designed?
Yeah, you must since you claim intelligent design.
You know what the criteria is, Brenda. I've talked to you a couple of times about creation.
What?
Creation is an indicator of a creator. I remember
begging the question. That's begging the question.
No, it's not begging the question. You don't know what the begging question fallacy is, man. You keep saying that.
It's literally it's begging the question is when the conclusion is in your premise.
We'll come back to this later. No, it's not.
Yes, it is. That's what begging the question is when the conclusion is in your premise. You said that creation is when there's something that's created.
See what I mean? You're so loud and over talkative that you don't know or understand anything you're saying. Okay, you are right to say that begging the question has to do with when you are assuming your conclusion. You're right when you say that, but there's an exception to this, and that is when your premise, your first premise or your second premise, is trying to utilize a universal fact. You can challenge the fact and say, well, it's invalid because of X, Y, or Z. But when you're utilizing a fact or universally accepted truth into your premise and how it's laid out, that's different.
Baloney.
Okay. Do you know why I said
Guys?
That's coming directly from an argument. Yes.
Guys, just on the topic of Brenda, you said, how do you prove design? Is that right? Well, how do you prove there's the design, or how do you infer a designer?
How do you distinguish? By what criteria do you use? Since you believe in intelligent design, there must be some criteria that you use by which you can distinguish something which is designed from what is not been designed.
Let me get on that really quick. Let me get on that really quick if I can, because this connects with what we were talking about earlier with the examples of books. The book analogy the book analogy is good for when you're talking about design, because with the book you can compare the similarity in sequences, and that will lead you to the conclusion of a common author. But she's trying to say, well, you can utilize the similarities in sequences to indicate a common designer, or I'm sorry, a common like common lineage of some kind. Well, the problem there is that we actually have a mechanism, intelligence that we know has always been the producer of languages and codes, right? So we have something that we can trace back to a root source and say, okay, well, this is a standard. We know that intelligent agents can produce languages. That's what we're observing. All she's doing, and this is the problem that we're dealing with when we're looking at lineages, or we're just trying to compare the similarities in objects without dealing with the mechanisms to see if that actually is a real world phenomena. All she's doing is comparing it, and we don't know. All we're doing is we're comparing it. We don't know, and so by using that analogy, the point is to try to help her understand that, okay, we have an example of intelligent agents producing something. We have an example here that could be an indicator from an intelligent agent. I hope this is making sense. We have an example here. It's a standard that I'm putting on the table for both of us to put our arguments on the table. We have an example of intelligence producing languages and codes, right? She's trying to claim that the similarity in sequences indicate that there's an evolutionary common ancestry or lineage. We have a standard of cause and effect. She does not. She has a theory. That's why the arguments that I had with the people last night, I was very careful to point out at the very beginning of the discussion that I'm not trying to make a scientific theory. I'm just trying to deduce to a particular conclusion utilizing certain knowledge, because a theory can be right or wrong. A theory utilizes certain facts to try to use inductive reasoning to come to a conclusion. But
I have a
there are
question.
theories in the past that have been more wrong than that have been more
I
right.
have a question. I have a question about that. So, are you saying that intelligent design is not a scientific theory?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that just
you said it's not a theory. You said it's not a theory.
Will you stop? Do you want to hear me talk, or do you just want to hear yourself talk? I can answer for myself if you want to hear what I got to say. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm utilizing an argument that is better than just utilizing the scientific methodology, and here's the reason why. Models they come and go all the time in science, and there have been models in the past who have legitimately utilized the scientific process and utilized the scientific model, but they have failed. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that rather than using trying to come to a theoretical conclusion, or I don't maybe how that's not the best way to put it, maybe assume some sort of conclusion by utilizing facts, just sitting on knowledge and just letting us understand things from a causal perspective, because that's a better way to hold to things, right? And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that you do not get to utilize pareidolia or pattern seeking or similarity in sequences and act as if that is equivalent to a causal phenomena. We can do that by looking at books and saying, well, because we know language comes from books. We can do that from an ID perspective because we're only appealing to knowledge and cause and effect. But from an evolutionary perspective, we only see small variations and changes happen now to an extent. And we infer that what we're seeing on a grander scale is the end result of the small changes that were happening, that we see happening. And so you can infer and assume that, but you can't say something like when we're dealing with an unknown example, like, for example, you have two authors for two different books. You don't know who they are. You don't just get to assume something like that. You have to have evidence of some sort of mechanism interacting in the real world so that we can actually say that these evolutionary changes are some sort of a real world phenomena. And so when you start talking about history and all this other stuff, you're jumping over all of this stuff that I've been questioning to you from the very beginning.
Well,
and,
you brought up the books, not me.
Yeah, no, that was to help you to understand your flawed logic.
But
As far
I showed
as
that my logic was sound.
the designer argument goes, and I'll get you guys both to comment on this. Doesn't the irreducible complexity of consciousness, human consciousness, doesn't it infer design? So if it infers design, then there has to be something or someone who's the designer of the design.
I don't know that consciousness is irreducibly complex, but complexity itself does not indicate design. And you have to have a criteria, and I still have not heard one, and I still have not heard an answer to my question. How do you distinguish design from non-design?
That would be the criteria I would use, Brenda.
What criteria? How would you distinguish? What is the criteria?
Well, the criteria is that human consciousness, is an irreducible complexity. It's vastly complex and cannot be reduced. And science is relatively clueless about consciousness even today.
I was asking for a criteria by which you could distinguish um, design from non-design, and you still haven't answered the question. So how would I distinguish? I have some object. It's strange. It's complex. How do I know if it's been designed or not?
What are you talking, Brenda? Well, what have I been
That's
saying?
the question. How do
What
you
am I
know
referring
how do you
to?
know if something has been designed or not?
Because it shares a causal linkage to an agent. That's why.
But you don't know that. You just found this object. You don't
But no,
know its
no,
causal
I do know.
past.
You know why I know that? Just think hard? Do you know why I know that?
Know what? What is it you know?
You know why you know that?
Why I know what? What is it that I know?
Do you know why Gavin knows it? Do you
Knows
know why
what?
every single one of us watching knows
Knows what?
a thing that is created by an intelligent creator?
How do you know? I'm asking you, how do you know it's designed?
Just
I
think
can
hard.
answer that,
I want
Brenda.
you to think really hard, Brenda. How do you think that we know that something has been made by an intelligent creator? How do I
I
know?
don't know.
If I look at a laptop, how do I know that that thing was made by an intelligent creator?
I'm asking the question in
I'll
general.
give you the
How would
answer.
you
Yeah,
know?
I'll
How?
give you
I
the
can
answer.
Yeah.
answer that.
I'll give
How?
you
I
the,
can answer that,
I'll give
Brenda.
you the
Brenda, I
answer.
can answer that.
Your uniform
I can
experience.
answer. I can answer that, guys. We're not the only ones to wrestle with this question. For hundreds of years, minds that are far more intelligent than ours have wrestled with this concept of consciousness. And it always comes down to a creator.
So you don't have an answer then, because I was asking, how do you distinguish designed from non-design, and you still have failed to give me any criteria by which I could use to distinguish something which is designed from something
I've
which is
given
not
you,
designed.
I've given you the
No, you
perfect
talk
example.
about consciousness. I'm asking for
Right.
criteria.
And don't talk over the top of me. Now, I've given you what I consider to be my personal example, but you don't like that, and that's fine. That's
Well,
fine.
how would I use
Be honest.
conscious? So, Gavin, how would I use your answer, which is consciousness, to decide whether something is designed or not?
So, Brenda, can you not pay it? Can you not understand the difference between a house built and debris laying all over the floor outside? Can you not
Uh,
tell the difference between a teepee and just sticks laying out outside? You can't. You telling me you're going to sit over here and just tell me that you can't tell the difference between chaos and strategic order?
how would what
You would
criteria
know
would I use? What would be the
uniform
criteria?
experience.
What's the
Uniform
criteria?
experience. Uniform experience. Uniform experience. You
What does
know
that
based
mean?
on
What does uniform experience mean?
okay. So
Well, I
you're gonna
don't know what that.
you're gonna stay muted while I answer you. Okay. Based on cause and effect. Okay. Based on your uniform experience. Based on the consistent history of creative beings always producing these things, and you being exposed to these things since your birth, being part of modern society, you are aware of the objects of creation. So the fact that you're sitting over here and asking me, well, how do I know if something is design or not? Well, you know the answer to that question. This is what is
No, I
called.
don't know. That's why I'm asking. I'm legitimately asking.
You legitimately don't. You're going to tell me you legitimately don't know what a
Yes.
created
Yes.
thing is. You don't
Yes.
know what a created thing is. You
Yes.
don't know. You don't know what something is that's made.
I do
You
not.
don't, you're so incompetent that you don't know that the
Yes.
laptop or phone that you're using
No.
was made by somebody.
Let's say that I'm
What about
walking in.
answer the question? I want
Yes.
you to answer that
Yes.
question.
I
You're going to
will.
tell me you have no. You can't tell the difference between your laptop being made and sticks scattered across outside. You don't know that
I
was.
do not know the difference. I do not know of any criteria that I could use to distinguish something which is designed from what is not designed.